My name is Stellasue Lee, PhD. I hold a degree from Honolulu University in literature. Yes, I am also an editor. I was editor of a leading literary journal in Los Angeles, California for 15 years. Then I'm also a teacher. I teach privately. I have students around the world, actually. And I teach at writers' conferences, lecture, keynote speaker, wife. I think that people who write, not just necessarily poets, but people who write, take things in a little bit more deeply than the average person. The police, will come in when there's a crime and they'll interview 5 or 6 people that they think have viewed the scene, and everybody will have a different testimony because they see something different. But if there's a poet being interviewed or a writer, they probably have a better chance of getting what was actually there. It's a mind's eye thing. It's part of what makes a writer, why they're fascinated with getting something down on paper. I think writers in general are more observant than the majority of the people, because their mind is really occupied with image moment. In other words, that's what writing is all about, creating a moment with a lot of images. It's the same that I teach. It's very simple. It totally eliminates any type of writer's block. You follow this simple method, and there is no such thing as writer's block. You sit down to a blank piece of paper. You start where you are. It's Tuesday. It's 3:30 p.m. I am sitting in a classroom, and then you begin to describe what you see. I see a ladder, I see some light screens, I see a TV, I see a filing cabinet, I see some boxes. And those boxes remind me of the last move I made, which took 23 hours from a house up into the 6th floor of a high-rise where we now live. So, in other words, it takes you to something that you were not thinking about before. And then I would have to describe the boxes, and then that would take me into the move and describing the move. I don't remember how I wrote that. I know my husband was away. It's part of the daily practice of just showing up to the page. And just that cat sitting there looking at me. I didn't know I was actually writing a poem. I was just doing my practice, which is to get it down on paper. If it turns into a poem, yay. If it doesn't, I've done my work. Well, intention and meaning to the reader, or in this case, the viewer, is a very complex issue. A lot of people who have never had a cat will really not be able to even fantasize what this cat is doing. Cat owners will get it. They'll see the picture. But the truth of the matter is, and whether we're reading a novel or a poem or whatever we're reading, we're only able to bring to the page from our own experience. So the author can have all kinds of intentions of what they want the reader to feel, but that isn't necessarily what happens. So the best you can do is to give that reader enough information that they can then bring their own experience to the page. The poem that I wrote this morning, I have no idea where this came from, but I got to thinking, I saw on the internet that there was going to be a car show, I think in Los Angeles, and there was this 57 four-lane, and I had a boyfriend that had a 57 four-lane with flames shooting out the sides, you know, and it was on a rake, and I got to think, his name was Delray Hughes, and oh my gosh, I was in love. So I just started writing about Delray and his family and the 57 Ford Fairlane with the flames painted on the side. And yeah, I never know what's going to come out of here. And I don't try and control it. Do my students inspire me to write anything? I am so inspired by the bravery and the courage of my students. And that encourages me to be brave. I tell them to be brave, but you know, Richard Bach says we teach best what we have most to learn. So do they inspire me with any specific subject? No, not really, but a really strange thing happens. I only take 12 students at a time because I spend an hour on the phone with each student each week, and then I spend about 20 minutes per day with each student's work. So you can see that that's pretty much a full-time job. And if one student writes about the ocean, it'll be like 8 of them will write about the ocean that day. Or if somebody writes about their mother, 9 or 10 of them will write about their mother. You know, it's that monkey mind, you know, kind of thing that it's just amazing. Last thoughts for this interview. Well, poetry is a little bit like religion. When you find poetry, you just know you're a poet. You know you're not a novelist. You know you're not a short story writer. You are a poet. There are many poets who are also wonderful novelists. Stephen Dobbins has, 30 books out, but he has also 27, 28 poetry books out. Look at Donald Hall. My gosh, he's so prolific. Even now, he's still prolific in his late 80s. Philip Levine. There are so many. Philip Levine didn't write any novels, but he laid into his 80s writing every day. And poetry, a lot of people who aren't familiar with poetry today thinks that it still rhymes. It doesn't. Poetry is accessible. It's image moment. It's a short story in a poem. It has a point. And I'm a high J, 98% J on the Myers-Briggs. I like closure. So the poetry is the perfect form for me because I can get in there, do it, and get out. That's really what it is for me. I have written a novel, and I took my first novel to a writers' conference, and within a day, I realized I didn't know how to write. My novel was dreck, and I threw out all but one copy of it. And I was very fortunate because at that conference, they had quite a few very well-known poets. And like religion, I just knew that's what I was. I'm a poet. Well, this is like a conference, and it's like getting together and doing something together. And that's always a wonderful process. So being here at this school with all the students, we're collaborating. And isn't that wonderful and fun? I love it. My husband asked me a couple of years ago what I valued most. And I didn't really even have to think about it very long. As far as material things, what I value most are my poetry